Hello and welcome back to 100% Real with Ruby. Today I have JEB Johnston, but I can't really introduce him as just some emotional eating expert because he kind of doubles in all shit. But the thing that I can say we both have in common is that we've specialized in different things and we've spoken our passions on training, on doing the top level types of training, the top level types of nutrition, but it all comes down to the baseline where our habits, our environment, and the fact that we are humans, not robots, actually holds us back, because we can have all the best intentions in mind, but we are human at the end of the day. Life happens at the end of the day. And it really isn't about the food we eat or the reps or the sets that we do, is it? It's so much deeper than that. So I'll let you talk about what you found coming to this part in your journey as a coach and what you find to be the biggest issue, the biggest elephant in the room when it comes to actually getting results and keeping them with your clients.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, my journey to where I am is pretty circuitous. I started off, first of all, I got into the fitness industry not until I was in my 30s. I didn't even start really lifting weights until I was in my 30s. I mean, I had lifted weights, so I was always an athlete, but I didn't really get serious about it. I didn't pay attention. I didn't know anything about it. And I was a hairdresser in New York City, worked with like celebrities, models mainly. And then just like kind of got engrossed in the fitness industry through contacts because I got into lifting when I was like 33 actually when I started, and just became really close friends with some people in the fitness world because it's New York and that's how it is. And ended up kind of creating a new career, and nutrition happened to be where I felt was my kind of preference. I was into training, but I often felt like, hey, I've got a lot of friends who are really, 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 really freaking good trainers. And so I would find myself recommending them over myself for people. So it was a really bad sales strategy. But nutrition was something that I was really into, and I'd always been into it. And that ended up really driving me down this behavior route. Like I said, my prior career was being a hairdresser. That's very much, and I'll apologize now. My wife is out of town, so I'm babysitting the puppy and the grown dog in my office, and they're probably it's witching hour here. It's like, 8:15 at night, and the puppy goes crazy. So hopefully they'll keep it down. But yeah, so behavior stuff as a hairdresser, I talked to a lot of women and we talked a lot about body issues. I wasn't a barber. I worked 99% of my clientele with. I had been a bartender through college. I was an actor and a musician, so I was trying to make my way there. And so bartending was obviously very much, I talked to people a lot about life and behaviors. And so when I got into nutrition, that was kind of the natural lean in. My mother also happens to be a psychologist at Johns Hopkins University Medical Center in Baltimore, Maryland, in the States. So it kind of was, whether I wanted to or not, that was kind of where I was going to end up. And so in that exploration, we find, what do I find is the biggest obstacle? Well, to me, it comes down to really self-awareness, and understanding that food is not fuel. It is fuel, but it's not just fuel. That food is not just sustenance, but it's family, it's religion, it's history, it's culture, it's all these things. And so when we try to boil it down into this myopic view, we tend to lose sight of all of these influences that make it difficult for us to eat in a manner that is commensurate with goals on weight or size or health. There's a lot of factors that go into it. And so I think the biggest obstacle is that it's not a solution, um, even though the solution is simple, right? Even though that at the end of the day, we can lose fat by eating less calories than we burn. Um, but it's how do we do that? And how do we do that in a sustainable manner? That is really the question for the ages, right? It's the question that all of us are trying to work hard to change on at least an individual level, because I'm not really sure that we can change that on a systemic or global level as much as we'd like to try. At least not until there's really a big breakthrough in probably medication or gene therapy of some sort. I really think that would be the only systemic opportunity to change the kind of path we're headed on.
Something you brought up in all of that is the external environment. Like, there is so much about the food itself, and it's not so much removing all of these different components that make that food what it is, but if you have a goal in mind, if you want to change your body, if you want to change your lifestyle, you need to realize that all the beliefs that you've had about that food and all of your prior experiences with the food, everything leading up to where you are now, quite clearly is not serving you in moving forward to where you want to be, because that's why you're stuck where you are. Even though there might have been like different phases in the past, until we learn to actually deal with those emotions and figure out what that led to and what our defense mechanism was. Because for some of us, we seeked comfort in food, or food was quelling emotions. But there are so many, like you mentioned it in one of your posts, how studies have shown people who believe their willpower is strong, they don't actually have stronger willpower than someone else. It's just that their belief is in it. And we were speaking previously before I clicked record on athletes, and having been a top level powerlifter myself, like the one thing that got me there was visualization. And I spoke about it before. I used to visualize, like I used to feel the scrape on my hand or the Erlings on the bar, just visualizing it before I even got under the bar. Like, that is what helped me lift the shit that I didn't think I could lift. The power of visualization is key. And if you believe you can, you can. If you believe you can't, given that it's a reasonable thing. Not like you're trying to lift like 100 kilos when you physically can only lift like 50. But where exactly does environment, willpower, and then I guess the elephant here is actually the self-awareness fit into all of this? Because people also just eat out of habit. People also just eat because it's there and they didn't give it a second thought. But then they spiral down this self-sabotage and they're not actually addressing what really happened. Or they might not even realize there's emotions behind it. It's just there. So how would you tackle that whole complex thing that is really not about the food?
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because you just talked about a pretty simple and seemingly a pretty normal situation with anyone who's dealing with fat loss, right? And on the surface, it sounds like, okay, like here's just like some things that people do. So when I hear those things, though, I'm running through my head and I'm saying, okay, we have a huge, complex series of actions that's going on right here. From the very start, right? Like we say, we talk about like willpower or discipline and a lot of these things. And I think part of it is we've created this kind of aura and this idea around discipline and willpower. And a lot of it is kind of, BS, right? Like a lot of it is like people are like, oh, well, people are overweight because they just don't have any willpower. Listen, I've worked with people that are special forces operators. I've worked with CEOs. I always tell people, I'm like, listen, I work with a guy who makes $15 million a year and can't lose weight. Are you telling me he doesn't have discipline or he doesn't have a work ethic? Like, until you're like, if you want, because then I'll flip it around and be like, how much money do you make? Oh, you don't make $10 million a year? You're lazy. That's stupid. Why would you say I'm lazy because I don't make $10 million a year? Well, but you're saying the same thing is because this person can't make that thing happen. A lot of what we ascribe to discipline is just stuff that we like to do. And we can say like, oh, well, you know what? But I don't really love it. But you value it. You get something out of it. Otherwise, you wouldn't put that effort into it. And so I think that right there, and that can develop a series of shame points for somebody who feels like, why can't I do this? Some of the people that struggle the most are the most successful in every other area of their lives. And so when they look at this thing with food and say, why can't I achieve this? They feel shameful. They feel like I shouldn't have to have help with this. Everything else in my life, all I have to do is work hard and it works. And this one thing, why is that? And so then we talk, then the next step is like you talk about the environmental factors around it. Okay, well, what the stories or whatever, everything that they've had previously, like what are we as humans? We like to, we're kind of like these balls of flesh and all. We like to think that we're, something more than what we are. We're kind of just predictive computers. Everything that happens is based on what happened before. We create a predictive model and then we do that. So when we engage in these behaviors, we're engaging in exactly what we're supposed to do. These are just the predictive models that we've built up over 20, 15, 20, 30, 35, 40 years, and we're going to engage in those things. Now, we can break or change those habits. We can change those. Like you said, a lot of people just eat out of habit or boredom. So what is that, right? And a lot of what that is that we don't engage in mindful behaviors. We don't particularly engage in living a life of quote unquote mindfulness. And that doesn't mean that we're going to sit down and, all meditate. And I mean, although I'm a big, believer in meditation, but mindfulness in and of itself is really just being in the present. So when we talk about how people just eat out of habit or they might not consider it emotional eating, but it is, because it's almost always emotional. Whether we pay attention to those emotions or not is a totally different topic, but there is some kind of emotion derived from whenever we're eating. Now, unless we are really regimented and we always eat at 8 o'clock, and there's those of us that do that, and I'm one of them, and I happen to be a little bit kind of robotic in those manners, but that's fine. But most people don't. And so when you ask someone like, oh, why were you eating? They're like, first of all, they might not even know that they were. Second of all, they're probably gonna say like, oh, I was bored, or oh, I was stressed, or oh, I felt like I had low energy. Like, okay, well, let's explore that, right? You're bored. Bored isn't really a feeling. Let's figure out what's going on there. You're probably like 99% of the time, it's some type of anxiety, right? You're not being present. You're not in the moment. You're thinking about something in the future. You're nervous about something in the future. And it's really difficult for a lot of us to be in the moment and be okay with where we are. So how do we get out of that? We have to do something. We have to be somewhere. Drugs, alcohol, shopping, these things are all behaviors that help us remove ourselves from being in the moment. And so boredom, you're like, oh, I'm stuck in this moment. I'm so used to fidgeting, doing something. I'm on my phone. I do all these things. What am I doing now? Well, nothing. Okay, well, how do we sit with that? Well, I'm not going to sit with that. Let me go to the cupboard and see what snacks I've got.
This actually ties back to something you said in doing your Barbie years. Like, you were talking to a lot of women and all you could talk about them with is their body image. And something I am so big on in my coaching, and everyone's going to just like face palm their heads. Identity, mate, identity. Like, the way you speak of yourself, the way you view yourself, that shapes your actions. Like, if you believe you're always going to be a failure, you're going to slip up, because you're not believing in the possibility, the slightest possibility that you can actually succeed, you can actually stick to something. And that, like, I can actually speak from my self-experience. Most of my life was, I have no self-confidence. And I actually was just seeing some photos on the years ago. I was training in a bloody singlet all the time. Like, you see me now, I'm never in anything but a crop top. Like, I didn't even have the confidence to wear like my crop top in the gym. Like, I've come miles to get to where I am now. But the thing is, you need to realize it's a process. Like, I've been doing this shit for over 7 years. People are not even willing to give it a week. Like, I'm going to give you a case study of a client that I think will really open up that conversation. But you mentioned comfort, shame points. People don't like getting uncomfortable. They don't like feeling feelings. Like, I know that I still have some emotions to explore, because I can't experience anger unless it's just one particular person, but that person doesn't exist in my life anymore. But there are things that we need to be willing to sit with in order to move forward. And if our identity is so tied up in the past, how can we ever give us the chance to move forward? And I'm seeing that a lot with clients. I will get Jeb on in a future episode to actually talk about how if you were doing yo-yo dieting all the time and always putting the weight on, or you were so overweight in the past before, and you're scared of getting back to that, how that can impact you. But that's for the next podcast. But shame points, comfort points, being able to stick with that, and actually being willing to work through it. And you mentioned as well, I just have to work hard and I got it. Okay, so why don't you have it then? Because sometimes you need to actually get someone who's been there before, or they specialize in that, because they can actually make you see things you don't see yourself. Because who here asks themselves the right questions we need to ask ourselves? No one. Like, we're not. And then the future thinking. So the case study I wanted to actually bring up, because no one's willing to explore emotions, is I have this client, and she isn't willing to sit with any emotions. I'll get it. Like, I thought that she was actually successfully journaling once, but I realized she didn't even own the journal. I'm like, okay, so I thought in my whole mind she was journaling, but these emotions keep coming up. It keeps leading to binging. But then when those emotions don't come up, she's got the habitual snacking, but she just says it's habit. She's not hungry. There's no emotions. It's just habit. But every time I talk to her, I always fail. I have no self-worth. I keep slipping up anyway. All I ever do is cheat on my diet. And then when I dig deeper into it, because I ask the deeper questions, it's proven by everyone else around me and how everyone else treats me. The silence came from, yeah, but you're only seeing that the way that you are. That's not actually what's happening. I didn't get a reply to that, but there is so much tied up in, we need, like, how can we work through all of that to then work through these pain points that trouble so many people, to actually be able to move forward and not let the past hinder them, and how exactly this shapes not only our actions, but it feeds back into our identity and back into this self-perpetuating cycle of being stuck.
Well, one of the things that I impart in my clients, we do a lot of skills work, and most of the skills work that I pull comes from a practice called dialectical behavior therapy. And because I do that, because there's therapy in the world where I make sure that we know, like, hey, we're not doing therapy here. We're not going to deal with the past, right? The past will inform everything that we do. Past trauma will likely inform everything we do. But we're not here to deal with that. And in fact, I don't know that it's beneficial, but if you decide with your therapist that that's a route that you want to work on, cool. But instead, what we're going to do is we're going to work on now. And we're not going to work on even the future. We're working on right now. And we are going to put ourselves in a position that hopefully in the future we'll be able to take care of. But if we work on these skills that take care of now, then we don't have to worry about what that past narrative is, because it's real, and you're going to have these feelings, and you're going to have a narrative of, I always fail, and that's fine. You probably will fail. You will probably fail at some point in this journey, and that's part of it. That's okay. Like, that's not a problem. But if you say, like, hey, if you're making kind of, I guess, preemptive excuses, well, then we probably need to look at that. But for me, it's the first thing I say is, like, let's look at the facts, right? That's a big part of what we do, is we have to say, like, we have to separate the facts from the narrative. And so I heard a great talk from a rabbi who was on a podcast. He's actually a rabbi that is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And so it was just a really cool conversation. But he says, like, what I want you to do is, I want you to think that the police showed up at your house, and then you and another person had an argument, and they're going to separate you. And I want you to explain what happened. And of course, the first thing they say is, well, you have to understand first, he was doing this thing. Well, no. I just want you to explain what happened. Well, it all started when, no, what happened? And so if we can really separate all of the storyline, because guess what? There's always a good guy and a bad guy in the story. And who are we in the story? Like, are we ever really the bad guy? No, it's someone that's doing something to us. We're the good guy here that's getting screwed or whatever. So we're going to have to separate that whole storyline and just say, like, okay, what are the facts of this situation? And then we can say, okay, so what are the thoughts? What are the emotions? What are the behaviors that also are connected here? Because that's going to determine, like, a lot of times our thoughts will lead to emotions, or emotions may lead to thoughts, and those things can lead to actions and or behaviors. And so I think it's important that if we let the things that are not facts drive our narrative, we end up with a story that, like you said, can be very destructive. It can be very self-damaging. And so this person in particular, like, she says, oh, I'm eating out of habit, there's no emotion. It's like, okay, well, if there's no emotion there, then it should be very easy to turn that off. So, like, what happens in that moment? So a big thing for me is, like, I talk about environmental statistics. All right, so you tend to eat every day at 4 p.m. That's difficult. So when is your last meal? Okay, well, if we determine that you're not actually hungry, like you just ate something at 2, so it's not actual hunger, what's happening at 4? Well, at 3:30, I start thinking, getting a little bit anxious because the kids get home right around 4 o'clock, and of all this stuff, and then it's just gonna be chaos, and they're gonna be running around, and everyone needs this, that, or this, or the other done, and I'm never ready for it, whatever. It's like, okay, well, cool. So now we know that that's just a big stress point. So there's an anxiety level to that. So what can we do about that? Well, I don't know. Maybe we take 5 minutes, do some breathing exercises at 3:45 every day. See if that helps. Okay. Well, I felt more calm when the kids got home. All right, cool. So now we got that out of the way. Maybe it doesn't work. Okay, well, let's do a pros and cons list for what eating brings you. Because guess what? We're going to engage in behaviors because we get something from them. So, like, what are you getting from it? Okay, well, what is it taking away? So if the pros are more than the cons, then we probably just keep doing it. If it's the opposite, then let's think about what we can change, maybe put something else in place.
The potential of anticipating failure, or even just the way we view ourselves in general, because we always fail, we've never kept it off before. Could that influence us more than we actually are aware of, especially if we're unwilling to sit with ourselves?
Well, I think the conversation I have a lot with people is, I'm afraid to go back to where I was. I'm afraid I'm just going to end up having to do this all over again. And the thing is, I say, well, bottom line is you can't go back to where you were. Even if you get back to the exact same weight, like, you're a new you, it's a new place, it's a new thing. You can't go back. So it doesn't matter. It'll just be a new you in, having a different problem. So get that out of your head. But you can't go back in time. So it'll just be something that happens now with a different aspect. But that is still a reasonable fear. And what I say is, there's also a healthy fear that's okay, because we don't want to fall back into bad habits. We don't want to fall back into that same mindset, or that same fatalist kind of view. And so I think those things, yeah, I think that having that view of difficulties being, like, insurmountable is going to be hard. But as we start to build some autonomy and some competency throughout the process, people will start to say, like, if I can just get little victories here and there, okay, well, I can do this, I can do this. All right, like, this is okay. This isn't too hard. I can do this. And they start to feel like they have abilities. And as that grows, and as their autonomy in that, because again, if they're just asking us to do the work for them, they're never going to be able to do anything. If they feel like they're doing it on their own, they start to grow, and over time, they will kind of feel that they've got that internal motivation to continue to get better.
This is something I do say a lot with my girls. It's like, well, I'm literally feeding you everything that you need to do the work, but you're missing that actual do the work part. And one thing that this particular client did say is, what's the whole point of having a journal? I have nothing to write. I'm like, you do. This whole conversation we just had is writable. but I just write the same things over and over again. I'm like, good, then keep writing the same things over again, because then I can actually start asking questions. Then we can actually, like you were mentioning before, you need to separate the narrative, you need to separate the story. And I was also listening to a podcast. I can't remember what the actual thing he said was, but it was, we usually have images in our mind of something in the past, like 58% better than it even was. So that's what we uphold. But if we're attached to that, then there's something deeper. We're not actually believing our worth. But I said to her the same thing you were saying, which I love. Scrap the old story. Cool, emotions exist. That's in the past. But if you're going to keep focusing on that, I did ask her how focusing on it makes her feel, and she put the things there. I'm like, if you keep focusing on that, you're saying you love feeling this way, because that's all that's bringing you. So you need to focus on where you want to go. If you're just focusing on the shit that makes you feel like shit, you're going to keep bringing shit into your life. Focus on what brings you joy, where you want to go. And I'm gonna quote you, so I might ramble on for a bit. Imperfect consistency versus inconsistent perfection. We all want perfection. It's the goal, even if it's unattainable. It gives us a metric to measure against. We are conditioned from our days of youth through the reward process. Like, we get dopamine every time we have something that triggers joy in us. Like, there's that dopamine. We're human, but it always leaves us chasing that. And if I bring my vulnerability back into it, I struggled for years with my food, years. And then once the whole bodybuilding thing came in as well, looking back on it now, which I probably mentioned before, but I never really acknowledged it until this conversation, is I was eating out of a fear of getting hungry. I wanted to always feel full. So I was always nibbling throughout the day. But because I was always nibbling, I didn't want to eat the fuller meal. So then that led to me always nibbling. So it took me a while to break it. But to break it, I literally just wrote down, I'm eating at this time. I'm eating a whole container. I'm not halving it. Because I used to half the containers, just be like, oh, this will last me the whole day. Still nibble. Nah, wasn't satisfied. Now I eat 4 meals a day at set times. And it took me ages to finally eat 4 meals at set times. But it works for me because I don't have to think about food. I think less about food and I have more time to live my life. But you need to figure out what is valuable to you. Do you want to keep thinking about food? Do you want to keep feeling like you're sabotaged, or you sabotaged yourself because you couldn't stick to a plan? Like, you need to actually develop a plan and sit with yourself, what's going to work. And then, okay, you might want to go back into your old habit, but having a plan on paper and knowing how it's going to make you feel and what it's going to give you in lines with your values, which my values was, I don't want to spend my life in the kitchen. I want to spend more time doing quality work for my clients because that's my value. So where does it align with your values? How exactly can you get people to sit with themselves to work through this, take ownership, and realize how the reality of your lifestyle, your values, and your identity in all of that actually shape it?
Yeah, I mean, the values piece is huge. I mean, that's one of the first things I do with every single client is like, hey, let's figure out a value, let's figure out a priority, and let's make sure that our goals align with that. Because that's a big issue, right? And so I think in that kind of in the spirit of like kind of the case study thing is one of the things that was pretty valuable for me, was I had a client that hated to work out. She hated, didn't really care about the food. And the reason she didn't like it is because she felt like when she went away to go work out, that she was like abandoning her kids for like an hour and a half. And she felt like, you know what, like I don't spend enough time with them as it is. One day she realized that when she went and worked out, she was more patient when she was home. She was more present when she was home. So that hour away from her kids made her a better mother. Well, her main value was her family. It was being a good mother, being a good wife, being a good partner, being a good employee, being a good coworker. Like, she wanted to provide that role model for other people, and she was better at it when she exercised because it made her just better all around. And so once she did that, all of a sudden she was like, I love going to exercise. I love training because I know that it improves the areas of my life that I want to be great at. Whereas prior to that, she couldn't really align it. And so the trick is I can try to backdoor it of like, hey, let's establish your values. And we know that we want you to work out and we want you to eat, like some whole foods and eat reasonably and like, have regular meals throughout the day. Like, all right, so instead of being like, these are my goals to lose weight and to do X, Y, Z, let's be like, okay, here's my value, here's my priority. Now, if I'm eating 4 meals a day, how does that align with that? How do I fit that into the values instead of trying to make my values revolve around my physical or goals that are a little bit not necessarily within that kind of value-based area.
Honestly, like people think that tracking their food is obsessive. People think that tracking what they eat or planning their meals is obsessive. They think that it's too much work. They think that meal prepping is too much work. Well, think about it this way. I never started meal prepping until probably around February. I used to struggle to actually hit the food I wanted, to hit my macros that I wanted, to hit close to ballpark of it all. And if I actually allow myself to continue down that path, where was it taking me? Was it in line with the person I wanted to be? No, it was leaving me scattered. I felt out of control. I felt like I lost power. It impacted the way that I felt about myself, how I felt about my body. My body probably didn't change all that much once I got in control of it because I habitually eat the right way pretty much anyway. But it still impacted how I felt about myself. And then everything else around that, how I then spoke of myself or showed myself to those around me. But once you actually take control of your life, and meal planning and tracking your food meal means something different to everyone. It can mean just planning out what meals you want to eat in a week, giving it a whirl, like just changing up 2 meals for dinner alternatively, but it reduces the decision fatigue. It reduces your reliance on this phantom willpower. And you don't need to worry about what am I going to cook with. Stop comparing yourself to a master chef or someone and just keep things simple for you, because then you can uphold your values of spending time with your kids. You're not living in the kitchen anymore. You're actually meal prepping. And I loved this part that you said, how will it make you show up better? And I want you wrote down that you could actually go on about this for years. So I'll let you do that. But we're not allowing ourselves to sit with ourselves, be present with ourselves, and acceptance. We're not allowing ourselves to do the acceptance, to get out of denial, to get uncomfortable. And you wrote this as well, it stop trying to find a way around what you know to be true. You have to change to see change. You have to put in work to actually see change. And that means weekends too. That means all the time. Like, you need to put in work consistently to feel the changes, because how the hell are you going to feel or see what a certain way of living does for you and your family and all the things that you believe in if you don't give it enough time? You wrote that it's not a passive activity. It's you actually need to do the work. So I'll let you talk more about acceptance, awareness, and how that leads into everything else.
Yeah. So like I always joke, like I have an emotional eating course group that I work with people that you kind of struggle with emotional eating, and we do group work, and we have a lesson each week. And the radical acceptance lesson is the one that everyone dreads. Like, I know that, because like so my core clientele is, women, I'd say like late 30s to mid 50s, early 60s, who are very highly educated, way smarter than me, way more accomplished than me, very professional, multiple degrees. I have a lot of like doctors, psychiatrists, attorneys. Like, it's like I work with like these really badass, capable women struggle with this one thing, right? So the acceptance piece is always like big roadblock. They're like, but I feel like if I am accepting this, then I'm just saying it's okay, and I'm not okay with it. I'm like, no. Acceptance has nothing to do with saying that we're okay with something. It's just understanding that that is reality. Like, that is just the way it is. Like, we can sit there and wish it was different. We can sit there and want it to be different. But it is reality. So we have to accept that. And in order to move on, in order to grow, we must first accept that reality. So when we talk about weight, I wish I had, started this 6 months ago. Awesome. Guess what? You didn't. So let's accept that and let's start now. I wish I was 50 pounds lighter. Cool. I wish I had a Lamborghini. Actually, I don't wish I had a Lamborghini, but I wish there's things I wish too, and they're not reality. So forget about it. Like it just does. It's cool, but guess what? Like I say it, I'm like that doesn't matter. Like that does not matter. So we accept the reality of the situation. Guess what? I am 50 pounds heavier than what I would like to be. That is the reality of the situation. All right, cool. You can accept something and also want it to be different. The basis for this dialectical behavior therapy is that two opposing truths can coexist, right? The idea that these two things that are in opposition can both be true at the same time. We can be overweight and be accepting of our body at that weight while still wanting to change. And this is where I think the pro-diet, anti-diet camps kind of just sit there and fight each other over something where the real truth of the matter is somewhere in the middle, is that we need body positivity. We need to be accepting of people of all shapes and sizes. We need to say, like, hey, you are okay. Your value is not determined by your weight. But if someone wants to change that weight, they also are not morally bereft because they want to change. So there's a middle ground there that is hard for people to wrap their heads around, and that is, to me, the basis for everything. Is we have to get. I mean, we are in a world that does not want to accept reality at all points. Like every time something comes up, the entirety of COVID. I always say it ripped the veil of control off of our eyes. We all thought that we had control over things. We all thought that we were in control of our lives, that everything was going fine. All we had to do was wake up, drink our protein shake, go to the gym, and everything's fine. And then we woke up one day and everyone said, guess what? There's no more planes. There's no more travel. There's no more gyms. There's no more anything. And we all went, wait, but I thought that I was in control of my destiny. It's like, oh, yeah, no, that's not true. That's not true. But I think that is a very important lesson for all of us to learn, that there are some small things we control. The greater aspect of things, we just don't actually have any control. It's just an illusion. But if we accept that, it's a lot less scary, and we can start to move on towards the things that we want to take care of. One of the great things, I mean, I know you're in Australia, so you guys have had probably the harshest lockdowns of anyone. But I've also seen some of the greatest innovations in home workouts come out of Australia. I mean, some of the shit that I've seen people put together, I'm like, you just basically you built a hack squat out of a band and a foam roller. Like, that's incredible. Like, you see this stuff. So I think that there was this like thing of like, okay, this sucks, but guess what? It's not changing. So I better figure out what I'm going to do to take care of myself in this moment. And the nutrition thing is the same way. Yeah, I'm 50 pounds overweight, but if you just sit there and wish it away and hope that you can buy a detox tea or a waist trainer, or that some diet's going to fix it, like, that's not it. It's not going to make you happy. It's not going to change all these other things. We just have to accept where we are and say, this is where I am. This is where I want to be. That's it.
I love that. I love that so much. It's where we have this situation now. You're not in control of a lot of the things in this situation. Obviously, it's a recurring situation. So accept it. Like, it's going to keep showing up until you actually accept it, because things that we hate or things that trouble us will keep recurring. They'll keep showing up until we work through them. If you don't want to work through it and you want to act like the hero of the situation and act like, oh, I'm tough, it's not going to come again, it will come again unless you work through it. And the key here is, as long as you have the desire to move forward, you can still have that acceptance. The only time that the acceptance defeats you is if you're not actually trying to improve yourself, because then you are still just staying stuck.
But again, if you accept it, then there's nothing wrong with it, because you're not stuck then. Once you accept something, you're no longer stuck. You can, if you accept it and don't want to change, you've accepted that, and you will be happy. That's the thing that people don't realize is if we're chasing happiness, if you truly, now, when most people say they're accepting something, they're not, right? They're not accepting the reality. And this is how I always ask people to think about it. If you're saying I wish, or if only, or things, if they just were this way, you're not accepting it, right? So if someone says, oh, I accept the fact that I'm overweight, I just wish that I could lose this weight. Well, then you haven't accepted it because you're wishing it. If you want to lose the weight, you haven't, you've accepted it and you're ready to take those steps. But if you truly accept it, you're like, there's people in that body positivity movement, in the Haze movement, who say, I accept myself where I am. I have no desire to change. Guess what? They're not stuck. They're exactly where they should be. And that's awesome. Like, I'm 100% in support of that. But if you want to change, then you also have to accept where you are in order to get to that next place. Because otherwise you're just going to, like you said, it's going to keep recurring.
That actually made a lot more sense. And I can actually give an example with that is, okay, so I was a powerlifter. I grew crazy amounts of muscle doing my strength training, doing my power building. I had pretty awesome glutes, pretty awesome legs. And then little Ruby's brain decided that she wanted to do a half marathon. So from February up until, I think we've been in lockdown 12 weeks, so from lockdown until about 6 weeks ago, I was running about 40 kilometers a week. So looking at my physique now compared to where I was, and then obviously the change in the fact that I've been training out of home, I've lost decent muscle size. I've lost quite a lot of my glutes. I accepted that. I'm like, yeah, cool. Well, my legs aren't where they are anymore. I've lost pretty much all of that. Cool. I lost pretty much all of my glutes. Well, I was shitty about that, but now I'm just like, you know what? I have a plan in place. I've changed my structure of my workouts to actually grow the things I'm focusing on. I accepted it. I'm not mad about it because it's what I did, and what I did to get to where I am now served a purpose. I enjoyed that. I pushed through discomfort because I hated running. So I wanted to force myself to run because I wanted to embrace discomfort and prove to myself that I could do hard things. And when you push yourself through discomfort, it teaches you so many lessons. And the process in all of that was giving me the clarification that, hey, you can do what you put your mind to, and you can push through when you want to give up, because I wanted to give up so many times. Now I don't really know I didn't know where I wanted to take this with two different things, but now I do. And that's this whole thing that we both speak about. My IGTV yesterday was all about this. If you want to listen to it, it's only 4 minutes long. Go listen to it. It's the one where I talk about the farmer. It's also episode number 152 on my podcast, but the farmer. You're not going to just plant the seeds and then sit on your ass and wait for the harvest, because who knows what happens with the storms in the meantime. Who knows if the birds come and pick it up, or the weeds decide to uproot the plants that you put into your dirt. You need to do the work. You need to actually do the process of getting your hands dirty, fertilizing the seeds, weathering the storm away, like doing the things that you need to do, pulling out the weeds. But you also need to make sure that you rest in order to be your best self, to show up to that crop, because otherwise you might pull out your plants instead of the weeds. Like, there is so much to the process that you need to focus on. You can't afford to lose sight of the process and how much that actually is what creates the final product. And you talk about it all the time, how if your process is less than pure, then you can expect everything else to reflect that, and how it's got to do with values. I'll let you just ramble on about that, because there is so much value in this process and how it actually gifts you the rewards you're after. Like it gifts you life, because that is your life. Like the actual process is your life.
Yeah, it's hard because I know, people who aren't like, we always talk about this in the industry because, like, if you're someone who's into this stuff, which most of our clients aren't, right? Like, that's what we have to realize first and foremost, is most people just aren't into working out and eating like we are. Like, we're the weirdos. Like, let's be honest, we're not the normal people. Because I go to the gym now, like, yeah, I have physique goals and I do jujitsu, and so it's like good to be like strong. But honestly, like, most of my lifting probably inhibits my ability at jujitsu because I'm always banged up and I can't move my shoulders very well, and like I'm old, and but I love lifting. Like, I love it. And I massacre myself in the gym. Like, I don't know that what I do is optimal. Like, the way I train, like, probably really not, like, I train to failure consistently, which I don't know if that's really advantageous for a 43-year-old guy who has no desire to compete and like does a lot of other stuff. Like, but I like it. I like that. And so, that process thing is sometimes it makes a lot of sense to us. But for people, it's not going to be as pleasant for someone who's not super passionate about it. But the way I view a lot of things is I've always been super infatuated with Japanese culture. My grandfather, like, I think, fell in love with Japan in World War II. My dad lived in Okinawa. Like, they lived in Okinawa when they were kids. My brother lived in Okinawa. It's just a place that's always fascinated me. And one of the things that's always fascinated me most about Japanese culture in particular is this intense focus on taking something mundane and creating an almost like spiritual thought around it. I have a post that I pop up every once in a while about the art of flower arranging, and the Japanese look at flower arranging this as a martial art. That flower arranging is the same as a proxy for going to war, and just putting that amount of care and that amount of effort into arranging a single flower so that it is done in a way that is intentional and passionate. And when you put the same amount of effort into the way you arrange flowers as you do to take over a country in war, anything you do becomes a passion. And so if you can develop some kind of internalized care about every little aspect of that work and look at the work itself as the reward, it really changes everything, really. And again, there's a lot of Zen Buddhist ideology that I throw in there as well. I mean, if I sweep a floor, that's there's that idea of work is godliness in a way. Like, that is our connection with something other. And looking at work as the reward, it changes things. It changes things. If we're looking for the reward first, the work becomes a burden. When the work itself is the reward, the outcome just becomes an extra, a bonus.
Yeah. That's that. Like, you look at that towards the whole like fat loss thing. It's like, okay, so if you're only looking to weigh this much on the scale, or if you want to lose this many kilos, you're gonna make a chore out of training. It's gonna be how many calories can it burn? And when you don't feel like it one day, you're just not going to show up, because it's a chore to you. It's not something that you can actually enjoy doing, because you're not finding joy in the process. And I'm pretty sure I spoke about this before too, but the neurology of like the neurology of the brain, the way the brain works is it thrives off the dopamine circuit. And if you're only going to reward that end, what's pushing you to actually do the work, the process? But if you reward yourself in the process by celebrating your wins, by trying to line it up to, I actually want you to talk about this next, by lining it up to your values and what it brings you, there's your dopamine hit. Like, this makes you feel strong. This makes you show up better for your kids. This is actually giving time to you in your lifestyle of you never give time to yourself. But then how is that helping you? It's actually helping you show up. It's helping you feel more in control of everything, because now your food feels more in line because you're actually giving yourself the time. Like, we didn't start off this way. Like you said yourself that you didn't start off in training. And if we compare ourselves to athletes, we don't know their starting story. We just see them where they're at, and then we can compare ourselves and beat ourselves up. But then they probably, maybe a lot of coaches as well, I'm not entirely sure because I don't follow those type of people, but there are probably a lot of coaches out there or a lot of influencers that preach this, or just do this, maybe you can cut out this, or just accept everything, have all these different foods, you can have balance. Yeah, but they didn't start off that way. Maybe there was some restriction to start with until they gathered confidence in themselves. Maybe it's not as simple as just, okay, just do this with your training and then you're all good. No, maybe there were tears. They were going around the roundabout again and going back home on the way to that. Like, we all start somewhere. And you mentioned, like we talked about this before I clicked record as well, is we're not athletes. We didn't do this shit in college. Like, most of you listening did not do this shit in college. We grew up with horrible habits. Well, probably not. It probably develops along the process of things happening to us, experiences that shaped who we are today and shaped our beliefs, our perceptions, and how we approach food now, how we approach exercise now. So you threw this sentence out where it's develop a process that is compatible with your values while in pursuit of your goal, but you're still focusing on the process, because inconsistent perfection, you've never done this shit before. You can't expect to know how to do it. So how does that all fit in? And how can we work in our values, shave off what we think we want, but realize what our real values are so we can reward the process?
Well, yeah, I mean, the big thing is like I send everyone like just a list of values, because that's the big thing, is like we have to first determine what are values and what are not values. Like, losing weight's not a value. Being skinny is not a value. A value is family. A value is community. A value is justice. A value is humor. There's also a thing that one of my mentors, Dr. Lisa Lewis, she threw at me and had me do, and now I actually have all my clients do. It's a website, viacharacter.org, I believe. But it's just a little strength test. So you go and you take this little test. It's an online test, is free, and they send you your results, and it gives you like your top strengths. And it's like 25 of them, I guess, but like your top 4 is what we usually go over, and then we look at the bottom 4 and see those things which aren't necessarily super compatible. But those strengths also often kind of veer into this values idea as well. And so what I like to do is to say, like, okay, like, what are your strengths? How can we look at those and see, like, what is it that you value? And often those strengths, like in a lot of my clients, it might be kindness and compassion. And so we'll look at that and be like, okay, well, these, and let's look at your work. In your work, you do, oh, absolutely, you're engaged. Look at what you do for a living. You work at a nonprofit, or so you're helping people, and like these things all seem very in line with your values. So you're happy in your work environment, and you're super successful in your work environment. Now let's look at your nutritional like needs, and let's talk about your relationship with yourself. How kind are you to yourself? How compassionate? Oh, okay. Now we've figured out, like, okay, like maybe you haven't aligned your values and your strengths into your work with yourself. So maybe if we can start to use those, this is what we're good at. We know this is your strengths, right? This is what has made you successful in your job. Can we take those strengths and apply them in our own lives? Can we act at home the way we act in the boardroom? can we act with ourselves the way we act with our friends? And I bet you when we start to get more congruency in that, it becomes easier. Now, does this mean that you're going to do this values work and you're going to lose 50 pounds? No, absolutely not. But on those days when it becomes difficult, and you can say, and my friend Josh Hillis said this as well. He's a really, really, really awesome nutrition coach. Yeah, and he said, he says like if you can align your values, then when you go to make that decision, instead of being like, should I eat this food? Well, my goal is to lose 10 pounds. Because you guess what? You can say, like, well, I'll just eat less tomorrow. And that's always going to be the potential thing. But if you say, does this fit my values? Well, maybe it does. And then guess what? Then eat that donut because if it fits your values and it's good in that moment, then we're golden. Like that's what you should do. But if it doesn't, it's going to be a lot easier to say no. And it's that kind of thing. Like if you say no a lot, maybe try saying yes sometimes. If you say yes a lot, try saying no sometimes. And see how that works and how that plays. But if it fits your values, if it is a values-based decision, it's going to be a lot easier to make the decision and then not have any guilt or shame about that decision after the fact because it is congruent with who you are and who you want to be as a person.
How you say you give this to your clients, how exactly do you like help them develop that relationship with themselves? How do you allow them to put themselves in the driver's seat so that they can actually make the changes they want to make and sit in the discomfort? Like they're not going to be willing to sit in any discomfort if their relationship with themselves is shot because they don't feel worthy enough to sit themselves. They don't feel worthy enough to do the self-awareness, to do the acceptance because they're not worth it. They're not good enough. How can we develop that growth for them within themselves and outside of them to move forward?
Well, we can't do any of it, right? We just have to give them space to do it for themselves. That's the first lesson of coaching is that we don't do anything. Like that's, my favorite is like feel like, oh, I'm going to change. You're not changing shit. Like you're allowing other people to change themselves. Like, to say that you're changing things, like whenever a coach is like, I change the world, or I'm going to say this, I'm going to change these. Yeah, you're a narcissistic asshole. Like you're not doing any of this stuff. A coach is simply there to help guide someone on their own journey. They're changing themselves or they're changing their environment. They're doing all the pieces. And so for me, it's really, first of all, just talking about relationships, like communication, like every single thing that we talk about, like we talk about, to me, so my whole philosophy, the basis of everything, kind of to me, my realization, like the meaning of life in reality is it's just our relationships, because nothing else really matters. At the end of the day, at the end of our lives, like we're like nothing really matters. Not to sound like a nihilist, but the things that matter are relationships and how we interact with other people. And at the end of the day, having those things. And guess what? That relationship with ourselves, that relationship with our food, those are all legitimate relationships. And so just talking about that and saying like, like this is something that we want to work on. How do we deal with other people? Like how do we, a big thing that I talk about as well is, again, from DBT is this idea of, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? And when we're dealing with relationships, when we're dealing with interpersonal development, a lot of times we have to stop worrying about being right if we want to get what we want. And that's a really hard thing for people to wrap their head around. Because what you'll say to someone is like, let's say they're talking about, not even about a relationship with ourselves. Let's talk about a relationship with someone else. My husband and I are in an argument. Okay, so this is what I want. This is how I think I want to approach this. Okay, well, let's just just out of curiosity, what are you looking to gain from this argument? Like, even if you're just having a talk with your friend, right? Like, let's say your friend's in a pissing match with her boyfriend. She's like, I'm gonna do this. What do you want to get out of that? Well, I just want him to apologize. Okay. So you're gonna do all these things that are just gonna piss him off and probably just make him shut down and start a fight because you want an apology? Well, okay, well, I kind of also just want to make a point. Okay, well, so let's figure it out. Do you want the apology or do you want to make a point? Because if you really want the apology, like, if you've ever worked in customer service, it's like, hey, you might just have to eat shit for a minute and then you can get the apology. If that's all you want, there's a lot easier ways to go about this than to start this whole fight, right? So we do it with ourselves too. If all we want is an outcome, why are we doing all these other things? Why are we punishing ourselves and doing all this stuff, flagellating, doing something that is really just creating a bigger problem because we want something that we could just make it very easy and say, like, okay, here's all I have to do. And so I think just having that conversation lets people start to realize that, oh, the way I treat myself is a relationship. So why don't I try to do the same things to be effective in my relationship with myself that I would try to do to be effective in my relationships with others?
Well, I've never seen it that way. I can probably use myself again just as an example for people. So in all the relationships I've had in the past, I used to avoid confrontation. I avoided argument. I avoided anything that did that stuff. Like that was
Very common.
Yeah, that was my avoidance. Like I can't recall any argument I've had. If people know me, the only person I've ever really had an argument with is the brother that doesn't live here anymore. But I've never really argued with anybody before. I don't like anger. I don't like experiencing anger. So I don't do that. But in return from that, I was always like, that held me back in the past from actually doing the hard thing because I didn't want to have that confrontation with myself. I didn't want to face the opportunity of getting into this mess that you're talking about and sabotaging things worse for myself. So the way that you go about all these relationships, question it with yourself and how that shows up in the way that you move forward, the way that you see food, the way that you do all this other stuff. Because if you're always trying to put up a fight in order to get an outcome, then you're going to be someone that just does not want to accept and then want to get better, I guess, as well. But you're just not going to move past that pain point, that constant sticky stuckness to get to where you want to be. And then on the other end, if you're someone that always avoids that, you need to start trusting yourself more. You need to actually experience that for yourself to get to the other side. You wrote this, I love it too much. As you said, the process is much more important than the outcome because you'll grow into the person you want to be, because it teaches us who we are, what we value. It teaches us how we learn. And that, like, I'll do better next week. That's an awesome sentiment, but it's we should all strive for better. Like that's what we want to do. But it's also meaningless because what are you doing right now? What can you do today? What specific actions? Like I will ask people that question. They're like, oh, I'll do this. Okay, cool. Now, because I've had people ask me the same question, now I'm like, okay, cool. So what exactly are you going to do? What time are you going to schedule that in? And it's just silence. They didn't think past the whole, I'm going to do that today. You need to make things solid. If you're not going to give a set time, if you're not going to partner it with another habit, what's to say it's going to happen? All well and good to have these intentions of, I'll do better next week. I'll do better tomorrow. Okay, how? And then you just get silenced and it's just like, okay, I'm still waiting. You can double tap my comment all you want, but I'm still waiting for an answer. How are you going to do it? What are you going to do better next time? How are you going to actually break through this situation? Set yourself up for success by being specific with your change. Don't let your goals fall away for a lack of focus. You need to make them real by having these action steps. Now, finally, I can talk about what I've been wanting to talk about since the start of this, and that's this chain analysis. This chain analysis to actually give people some practical takeaways. So we have this triggering event, or we have this environment, or we just have this habit that we like to just blanket it with. How exactly can we move from this thing, this elephant, this I hate you, you're holding me back, to actually getting to that outcome now?
Well, yeah. So this chain analysis is awesome. We use it quite quite often. It's basically an entire module of my emotional eating course is kind of dedicated to using the strategy. And um, I've had some clients who actually will put it in a laminate so that they can dry erase it over. And I've made a couple sheets of my own. It's if you just like Google chain link analysis, there's a bunch of different sheets. I made one of my own just because it was a little bit more uh, intuitive to use. It was a little easier, I think, the way I did it. But basically, if you envision a chain, like let's take a bike chain, just a regular chain, and there's one really big link, and that really big link is your unwanted behavior. For most of my clients, that's going to be an emotional eating episode. Some people might refer to it as a binge or a binge-like episode. That's the vernacular. We try to avoid talking too much about binge if it's not talking about disordered eating, but that's what people use the word, so I don't really shy away from it. So people will say binge. So let's say it's a binge. And that is the problematic behavior that you are looking to change. Well, most people say, okay, what happened? Well, I don't know what happened. I just started eating and I couldn't stop. Okay. So you don't know what happened, right? Well, it just came out of nowhere. I was like, well, good. The good thing is we know that it didn't, right? Every action has a previously triggering event. So we need to figure out what that is. Now, we might just know. We might be like, I had this conversation this morning that was, it brought up this thing that happened years ago that was really traumatic. And I think ever since that talk, I felt really bad. And then at the end of the night, I was just tired and I didn't have any back to that willpower. I had no willpower. And I went and, do you guys have Oreos in Australia?
Warriors.
Oreos?
Oh yeah. Oreos.
Cookies,
You
okay.
have Tim Tams as well. Tim Tams are probably
Okay.
more Aussie.
So Oreos or Tim Tams, right? Like some delicious, like just crack cookie, right? I got into the bag of those things and I just went to town. And for me, it's always Oreo because I can't stop eating Oreos. So I use Oreos for everything. Like that's always my when you're talking about food that's like crack, it's always be Oreos with me because I cannot control myself with them. So my client she's in the Oreos and she can't, so okay, well let's figure that out. Okay, so we know that triggering event. So now let's figure out first of all what were our vulnerability factors that led to the triggering event. Well, I didn't sleep very well, and I skipped breakfast because I was in a hurry, and I just figured, whatever. I'm trying to cut calories anyway. So, ooh, okay, all right. So we know that now we're in a vulnerable position. So that triggering event, which some days could have just been no big deal, not a big thing. Today, it really got to us. So what happened now between our behavior, our unwanted behavior, and that triggering event? Let's create a chain. And so let's look at the chain of events that led to that. Well, right after the triggering event, like what happened next was I was really in a bad mood and I had to take the kids to school and drop them off. And the line for school was really long. And this lady I hate was honking at me. And so we'll just link that and we'll talk about, okay, well, in this moment, was this a behavior? Was this an emotion or was this a thought? Okay, let's figure that out. And we want to be super detailed. And then if we can connect that triggering event to the unwanted behavior, we can start to see, is there anywhere in this link of events, any of these links in this chain that I can take away and replace with something else? And we want to just break that chain, right? We want to break that cycle. And if we can figure out how to do that, even just the awareness of realizing that we were vulnerable, we had a triggering event, and then that led to our unwanted behaviors, that alone can be a way to break it. But if not, we'll find out like, okay, hey, where can I fix this? And a lot of times it's a mindfulness practice. A lot of times it's something like a pros or cons list. I talk about something called opposite action, where you just do the opposite thing of what you think you should do because instinctually you just tend to do a shitty thing in that moment. So, it can be any number of things, but it's just a way to take this overwhelming event that seems unstoppable and uncontrollable and break it down into its smaller pieces so we can take those bite-sized managed chunks and start to figure out how to kind of start to chip away at them. The other thing with it is, other than just being this way to like write down everything and kind of lay it out there, my mother, so dialectical behavior therapy is something I came to realize that it was very helpful in skills-based awareness, and there's a lot of tools you could use. So I was asking my mother about it, and it turns out that she actually spent 2 months in a mentorship with the woman who created DBT, and my mom's actually one of the only clinical directors of DBT on the East Coast, which I didn't know. So my mom actually helps me a lot with this stuff, which is like full circle. I avoided everything my mother told me to do for my whole life, and then it's my 43. It's like, hey mom, can you help me with my homework? But she uses it a lot with her patients, and she's found that it is double duty because it's also kind of a pain in the ass. So when you have to fill this thing out every time you start to, before you engage in that unwanted behavior, you might be like, I'm gonna have to fill out a chain link analysis after this. That's gonna be a pain in the ass. And it's just one more little thing that helps you to pause before you jump into that behavior. So
And that's
it's
why it's so important to pause, but people just don't want to do the pause.
well, right, because how do we really pause? Like, it's like the whole pause idea is great, but if there's nothing, if there's no break in the mental action, there's just no reason to. So if we can create roadblocks almost to our unwanted, because we can create all the roadblocks to the behaviors that we want to do, right? So if we can create some roadblocks to the ones we don't want to do, it's going to do the same thing, and it just causes you to like stop for a minute and go, like you said, like, I mean, pausing works. It's just how do we get there? And so we can create these kind of like autonomous pauses.
I love that so much. I'm writing that bit down right now. You have these roadblocks on the way to where you want to go. You need to put them in place for what you don't want. And that's that, like, overwhelm will always be there. And it's something that I've used and still use to this day, because I'm constantly getting overwhelmed with all the things that I'm developing for my team. So if it's all in my head, I'm not going to be able to actually function as a human being. So I need to put this shit on paper. I need to actually start writing to-do lists. I need to have a to-do list that has pretty much everything that I want to do, then shove that away, and then get another to-do list that has the most important things. But like, overwhelm will always be there until you break it down. The breaking it down is the hardest because we're too busy living in our head and saying we're too busy. You need to be willing to actually do it. And yeah, okay, cool. So you might write the same shit over and over again. You might be a bloody record on repeat, but that's okay, because at the moment, it's just the awareness. It's just the, okay, I'm recognizing this. We can keep writing it over and over again, because in the process, we're learning more about ourselves. We're growing in the process, and we can also learn what not to do, because learning what not to do is also a very important thing. And it's kind of the way that I've learned a lot of things in my life. It's seeing things that I don't like and saying, okay, I know not to do that now. And that's made me go in the opposite direction, because I've seen more of what I didn't want to do than what I wanted to do before I got to seeing more of what I wanted to do. Like, that's how I got to where I am now. Like, because I'm a complete polar opposite to my brother. And I grew up with that. And I did not want any of that. So I learned what not to do. I learned all the things that are going to get me the negative outcomes that were there. So instead, I had to think, okay, so how can I avoid this? How can I avoid this? And it's as soon as you break down that how, but you also mentioned it's not just figuring out what it is that leads to this trigger, this response. You need to actually realize you're human. You need to dig into the emotions behind that and actually ask yourself how you feel.
Yeah. And so like pretty much everything boils down to identify, describe, and act, right? So like our emotions, like just identify the emotions in the moment, describe them with granularity. Steal that term from Lisa Feldman Barrett, who is I just the most like brilliant. Just such a fanboy, but she's a neuroscientist and a psychologist, so it just covers all the bases. But she says this idea of granularity, really describing something in detail after you've identified that emotion. Describe it in detail, every single thing you can think about it, and then we can determine an action phase next. But until we until we identify our emotions, like we can't regulate our emotions without identifying them. I mean, everyone, that's the other thing. Everyone I work with gets an emotion wheel, and we're like, hey, like, you know what, start to learn to pick these things off. I'm not great at being descriptive with my emotions because I don't really have a real varied depth of emotion. I'm not one of those people. There's clients of mine who can be like, yeah, this, I felt this, and it's like they really can dig in and find those things. I have to have that wheel and be like, okay, I know red is mad. Like I know I fall in that most of the time. What kind of mad am I? And like that, but it's helpful. And if I can identify that stuff, because guess what? Nothing that pisses me off is ever about someone else. It's always about me. And once I can be like, oh, I'm angry about that because it brings up this feeling of something that I have, and then it's like, okay, I don't really have a right to be angry about this.
Oh, whoa. Okay. This is something that is the best takeaway for this whole podcast. And it's that bit that he just said then, because we do not see things as they are. We see them as we are. And if we are getting an emotional response to someone else's behavior, or we're saying, oh, but this person is not seeing me as worthy, or the way that other people treat me make me feel like I'm not worthy enough. I'm like, yeah, but that's because what they're doing is making you feel less of you. So what can you do to feel more of you? I guess that the summary to all of this can actually be what you would do in that situation where someone's perceiving it that way and they're realizing, okay, it's a reflection on my relationship with myself. I know I'm not worthy because these people are treating me that way. I know that I'm not capable enough. I'm going to fail because these people are expecting me to fail. They're setting me up for failure. How can we actually then set ourselves up for success, tying up this whole conversation to actually moving the needle forward?
Well, I mean, I think just off the bat, it's that self-awareness piece that, if you want to see, if you feel like it's other people that are, nobody's doing anything to you, right? Like they are, like, I mean, one of the things that I come to a lot is that um, we're not responsible for what has happened to us, but we are responsible with how we react to it, right? Like we've all had shitty stuff done to us. We all are products of trauma and history and emotion, and that's that, and we can't do anything about it, right? Like that's not our fault. It's not, our we are not at fault for those things, but we do, like, it's that comes down to that thing of like, um I could have had a really terrible life or all these terrible things. That doesn't give me a right to treat other people like shit, right? So how do we move forward from that? It's like, okay, my every single emotion, every single reaction that I have is about me. It's not about someone else. And I think if we start to accept our innate narcissism, we can start to move away from it and understand that um, we are naturally going to run everything through a lens. As you said, um, it's not the way that would you say it was, it's not the way they see us, or it's the way we
We don't
are.
see the world as it is. We don't see people as they are. We see them as we are.
Right. And so I think that's such a great phrase. We see them as we are. And we see ourselves as we are, right? And so uh we react. And instead of reacting, if we can just start acting, I think then that can help. But again, and this is why I talk a lot about mindfulness. It sounds, I'm like, trust me. I mean, like, listen, I'm into jujitsu. I'm the least like hippy dippy dude in the world, but I'm a little bit hippy dippy. Like I'm like, I'm big like science guy and not really into. But at the same time, like, we were talking about my friend Ben House. Like, what is the big thing that Ben and I do when we get together? Well, guess what? We meditate almost, usually every day if we can. Like, or if we don't, we're talking a lot about, Ben is a very, very, very accomplished, his dad is actually a Zen Buddhist monk or priest or whatever you call it. And so we do a lot of that, and it gets a little hippy dippy, but it's really super helpful. It really helps us manage our emotions.
I didn't know that about Ben because I was introduced to him through my mentor, Luke Lehman. I don't know whether you know him.
Yeah, Annalise, yeah.
Yeah, he's my mentor. Well, yeah. And something that you'll see exists among a lot of the top people in our field, especially like those that actually are successful, is that they didn't start there and they were willing to fail. Like they failed on their way there, and they recognized when they needed to change their opinion on something. And to sum everything up from me before I hand it over to you to sum it up is the quote that you said, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? Like, do you want to stay stuck in your rightness or the way that you view something? Like you want to say that this way, like this is just how it is, but you need to actually change something in order to see the change. Like you will never get to that effectiveness of moving forward if you're going to keep saying you're right now, or you don't need to change, or you know you need to change, but you're too busy being right. You're too busy comfortable. I'll let you sum it up in the most actionable way to get out of being stuck and realizing that, like, this whole conversation, like we could have spoken about how calorie deficit is the way to getting your results. And I used to be that person. I used to be someone that said calorie deficit. Like I would see posts come up and sometimes I like reposting some stuff that I say, but there's so much of it just saying, oh, you just need to be in a calorie deficit. Mate, this whole conversation has proven to you that there is so much more than just a calorie deficit. There is so much more. And you could say calories in, calories out, but what does that really matter if the calories out equation is always going to be stuffed up because you're too busy stress eating, or you're so stressed out that your body just isn't actually burning effectively like it used to? Or if the calories in is so sporadic because you can't control your eating. That's got nothing to do with knowing, I already know I need to eat less, move more. You can move all you want. You can eat as little as you want, but who's to say that, like, anyone can do that for a day? A lot of people can do that for a week. Can you do that sustainably? Are there going to be these other human factors coming into it all? So I'll let you sum it all up. And if you want to plug anything at the end, aside from the fact that I'm going to try and find the link to your newsletter and your podcast below.
I mean, just to piggyback on that, yeah, I mean, don't feel bad because trust me, I was the same person who was being like, you just need to be in a calorie deficit, like Seco, you idiots, like what's wrong with you? Just, and now I'm like, okay, so my bad, like that was stupid. I apologize for all that stuff I said. It's true, like, yes, you need to be in a calorie deficit. Unfortunately, it's how do we get people in the calorie deficit, right? And so yeah, it's a very strange place to be in, the place of like, I'm I have spent a lot of the last like 5 or 6 years like realizing how many things I was wrong about, and fortunately for me, I have surrounded myself with a group of just freaking amazing people who are just super, super smart and challenge me hard. Like I have to think about everything that I put out there because I'm not worried about trolls. I'm worried about my friends because my friends are going to come at me way harder than anybody else, and they're going to poke it hard. So yeah. So like I'm not like, I know that where that's gonna come from. But then I also know those same friends are gonna send me their stuff to be like, hey, what do you think about this? And that builds a lot of confidence. But that said, like I make fun of, I meme about like people that just say calorie deficit. But the reason I do any of the things that you see me make fun of, it's because it's something that I have done. So I'm making fun of me in particular. So just to piggyback on that, but how do we move beyond being stuck? I mean, if I could answer that succinctly, you wouldn't be able to. We would. I don't know what. I would be very wealthy. I know that. I know that.
That's actually
Um,
perfect. That's the thing. Like there is no one way. Like you'll see someone put out advice on Instagram and hey, it's perfect, but just not for you, for someone else. Like there is so much nuance to every single bit of advice there. So
and that's just it, right? Like within my own practice, it changes all the time. I don't know what it's going to look like in 3 years. I hope that some of the things we say, but I also hope it looks very different, because if it doesn't, my biggest fear is being stuck. My biggest fear is being in the same place in 5 years that I am right now. So that is a motivator for me. Right or wrong, I can't say that that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know, but I think it serves my clients well, and I think it serves me well, because that's the type of personality I am. Um, but I think that in order to feel unstuck, we have to feel. So we have to start to get more in touch with being present. I'm going to come back to this mindfulness piece. Like, what, within Buddhist, secular Buddhism, there's this kind of idea of like anxiety is living in the future, depression is living in the past. We can't really be happy if we're stuck in either of those places. People fear being stuck is being stuck in right now, but they're not even living right now. And so I think the key to getting unstuck is learning to live by learning to live in the moment. And I think if we can do that, the other stuff kind of falls into place, right?
it does. So, because if you're living in the moment, you'll realize that you can change because you're not a tree. You're not actually stuck. You're like you are in the now. You're only stuck if you had that future in the past in your mind, like overtaking the fact that you aren't in any of those places. And it's what you do right now that you'll see in 6 to 12 weeks. It's in 6 to 12 weeks, you will be a sum of the habits that you did now. Like all of the habits that you're implementing now will be shown in 6 to 12 weeks. That is when they'll start to show up. And then consistently over time, it will lead to whatever outcome. But along the way, you will change the way that you do your process. And that's the beauty of life. And that's why you just need to know where your sat nav is set and do things in line with that, because you will move forward. Yeah. So I will leave Jeb's Instagram below, and I'm going to grab the link to his newsletter because I know he has one. I don't actually open my emails, but I've seen it pop up daily now. So he's gone from
It does.
he never used to like his writing before. I'm pretty sure I heard that. And then you decided, I'm just going to start with writing one little thing. And then from there, he's got a daily newsletter. So it all starts somewhere.
Yep. Yeah. So I send out. You'll get a daily email Monday through Thursday. It's just like some small. I based the newsletter on Seth Godin's, because sometimes his are like 3 sentences, sometimes they're like 5 paragraphs, but they're always actionable, like just good stuff. And I try to give stuff to people that they enjoy. But also, if you sign up, it's the website is foodonthemind.com. But if you sign up, you get, like, I have a little mindful eating guide as well that it's like a little thank you. And I also announce, like, anytime I'm actually taking new clients, it goes through my newsletter to my email list, because I'm usually full. I'm always full. And so in order to kind of get on that, it goes through my email list. I don't actually talk about that stuff on social media. So my social media is just like me. I don't know. I don't even know what social media is. I just use Instagram. I hate Facebook so much. So it's now memes, Twitter posts, and I'm getting back into doing songs on there. So I'm playing guitar. I need to get back to it. I need to record some more because I'm trying to just make myself play.
Saw that. Okay, cool. I got the podcast link now and your Instagram. I'll put that down below. Thank you so much for coming on. We had such an amazing chat, and I'm sure you guys took away so much from this because the wealth of the depth of knowledge in this area is so deep, because there is no bottom. it's just a black hole pretty much, because it can go anywhere and it all depends on you. You make the universe. You decide on your black hole. You just need to go far enough into it to find the good shit. So yeah, thank you for coming on and thank you for listening to the podcast.